And the reason I chose Uncle Sam is not just because of this cute play on words. To me, it's actually an imperative. I really feel that oftentimes, and this is from my experience with my colleagues, that teachers often feel that I have a specifically, clearly defined responsibility. My job is to walk into the building each day, be there on time, manage whatever duties I might have, go into my classroom, teach my class, do what I need to do, and then go home. And I don't mean that in a negative sense. Very passionate, very involved, very committed. Just as an aside, so that I know who I'm talking to over here. How many of you are first and foremost classroom teachers? Okay, how many of you are first and foremost school administrators? And how many of you are something other than the two? Okay, I have to find out what that other is. And we will talk. Okay, so certainly for those of you who are teachers, this conversation is about how do you see yourself in a leadership role? Why is that important? And what is that going to do possibly to change the relationship that you might have presently with your students? If you raise your hand as an administrator, I'm talking to you as a colleague in that respect as well. And what I'm asking you to do is to think about, as we continue, how can you do more, not only to empower your teachers in perhaps a formal capacity. We'll talk about that a little bit later, because oftentimes teacher leadership is defined as what we might call a quasi-administrative function. Something like dean of students, or curricular chair, or something like this. They're not quite administration, but they take on an administrative function within the school. And so then the point to the administration would be, well, what can we do to empower our teachers, not necessarily just in terms of giving them these types of roles, sometimes that's an appropriate thing to consider, but just in terms of who they are in your front lines, because that's a really important thing to consider, and where they have informal opportunities to lead. And there are many such opportunities. Okay? To me, the greatest thing that a teacher could be in many cases was an informal leader in places where they could sort of carry the agenda for me. I'm going to mention an example of that later. But it's so much more powerful. Right? Every administrator in the room, I am sure, forgive me if I'm being overly speculative here, but if you're like me, you've had a number of experiences at a faculty meeting or something like that where you had this pushback, you had this sense that the teachers weren't buying in, and then you had one or maybe a small group of teachers that really kind of carried the agenda forward in a positive way. And that sort of saved you from having to really retrench, and get yourself into this kind of combative position. So having them in that role, understand that they can be leaders in a very positive way, can be very powerful for all of us. Okay? So when we talk about school leadership, I ask you, who are your leaders in your school? Ask the parents, ask the kids, who are the leaders in the school? Most of them, as we talked about, will discuss the proverbial administration. Okay? But I believe very strongly that that is not really the case. I believe that our school is popular. We've got 60 members of staff. You have the capacity for 60 leaders in your school.